Public Affairs very much thanks Residco, our sole corporate underwriter, for helping to make the production of this show possible.
People want to know about the black conservatives and black conservative values. They may want to, take a look and stop in at the Black Conservative Summit, and they can find out more about that at the blackconservativesummit.net, right?
Yes, they can. We're actually...
It's coming up on September 6th and 7th and 8th, right?
6th, 7th, and 8th.
And we're taping this on August 20th, so very soon.
Yes, very, very soon.
What's the essence of the Black Conservative Summit? What will they find out about values? Because we were talking about that. What are your values? What are black conservative values? What are the values of others that we should be taking up? Talk a little bit about values.
Well, some of the values that we talk about and that I question why these black church leaders were fawning over, the liberal progressives, is that most black conservatives, most black Christians who take the Bible serious, I need to say that, there's some that do not, who take the Bible serious are pro-life, they're pro-education, school choice, they're even pro-Second Amendment. And there was a poll that was done out of a, I should have written this down, because I think it's American National Election Survey.
Good enough.
And they talked about the percentage of Democrats that actually identify with conservative issues. And they said that fewer government services, like 68%. Make it easier to own a gun or buy a gun, 75%.
75%, go ahead.
75% were pro-Second Amendment.
Okay.
They said they want to make it easier for people to buy a gun.
Easier, not harder.
Yeah, right. And the black, and the contrast is there's a thing out now called the Black Church PAC. And three of the things that they talk about is gun violence, voter suppression, and mass incarceration. Well, gun violence, when they generally talk about gun violence, is about taking away people's guns, right? Yet you have blacks saying that at least 75% want to make it easier to buy guns.
Because Professor John Lott, you may know, said quite a while ago, decades ago, more guns, less crime.
Absolutely.
You think that's true?
I do.
Why would that be true? Let me interrupt you.
Because when they know that people in their houses have guns to defend themselves, they're not going to come to your house. If they think you don't have guns, they're more likely to try and break in and steal whatever they think you've got.
So you prevent crime.
Absolutely.
By having more guns, and people know there might be guns there, because maybe they don't even go to the next person and commit the crime there. They may just give up on the crime for that day or that year, right?
Especially if they know that neighborhood.
Right.
Especially if you get a little organized and you know that everybody's got guns in that neighborhood.
So I was interrupting. You were talking about the groups, people say three things: gun violence. What are the other two things?
Voter suppression. They act as if...
Who's they? Who's they?
Oh, this is the Black Church PAC.
The Black Church PAC, these are blacks who
Church
the Black
leaders,
Church
yep.
figures. They think the real concern of everybody, especially blacks, should be on gun violence.
Gun violence, voter suppression, and mass incarceration.
Okay, so you just explained why they shouldn't be concerned about gun violence, because a lot of it comes from people who are confident if they have a gun and somebody else doesn't, they can perpetuate gun violence, right?
Absolutely.
So those people should be saying, how do we stop violence? And one way you stop it is with a gun, is that right?
Yeah. You arm the people who would be their victims. They're no longer victims anymore.
Right, and then they...
But they think that if you just get rid of guns...
So go on. So this group, the Black Church, is that what they're called?
It's Black Church PAC.
Black Church PAC, PAC?
PAC.
It's an political action
committee.
And they were concerned about gun violence and now also about...
Voter suppression.
And you think they shouldn't be concerned about vote before and what's
generally voter suppression is all about people getting IDs. They don't want to say you're trying to stop people from voting because you're making them go get an ID. Well, if you take a poll of most blacks, they say they want people to have voter IDs. It makes sense for people to have ID, some kind of ID. It doesn't have to be voter ID. It can be a driver's license, so they know who you are.
Blacks in general are okay. They don't feel that's discriminating against blacks. They don't think that's causing blacks not to vote. they're happy to show or display their ID, right?
Absolutely. And anybody who suggests that it's hard for black people to get an ID, they feel like that's racist in and of itself.
So your typical black person is not old and infirm and an invalid. There may be some blacks who are like that, just like there's some whites like that, but that's not your typical black person.
But
So
it's hard
if
to
you-
name anybody who doesn't have an ID.
Hard, because if you're old and infirm and you don't, how can that person who can not walk so easily, doesn't drive, how do they get the ID?
Well, most people have, I mean, somebody takes them to the DMV or
Okay.
there's all kinds of ways
They
to
have
get.
friends.
They have friends that take them.
Uber might, Lyft might. It's
Yes,
expensive,
yes.
but if it's getting your ID, maybe it's worth it.
And if they're
right?
church members, somebody from the church takes
Sure,
them down.
sure.
I mean, it's not
Because it's the black church pack. So these folks ought to be church members, and the people they're concerned about are church members. Why aren't they more church-like? These black church pack people, right?
I don't know. And then the last one is mass incarceration. So so we know today that, it's like a, what's it called? A turnstile. That the criminals come in and the criminals go out.
Revolving door.
A revolving door. Thank you. So it's not, I don't know what they're talking about with mass incarceration, because a lot of these folks that end up getting arrested get back on the street.
They're not
And
even
if they take care of this, because there's only a small number of people that actually committing these crimes.
Yeah.
If you put them in jail, you reduce some of the gun violence as well. So
Really, yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, so maybe we should maybe if there's a crime, and maybe if it's starting, there should be a number that you call, 911, and say Chicago, and you report it's a crime in process. And if it's good, if we've devoted right resources,
Right.
60% of the time we won't have what we have now. 60% of the time there's nobody home. Police, who's ever dispatching, they didn't even bother to answer because there's nobody there to dispatch because we don't have enough police to go out and help. So that's one thing. People in general, blacks and whites, would like to see more police to come out to prevent the crime in motion, right?
Yeah, but the left wants to say that you end up arresting people because it's over-policed. And I don't think there's too many people in the black community who say it's over-policed. They want police. They want to feel safe. They want to be able to walk the streets like anybody else in their own neighborhood.
And in August 2024, might have been different in Jim Crow South, maybe the 1950s, right? Mm-hmm. But, 1960, 1970, 1980 in the South or the North, a lot of people, there are not many people who should be worried that if a Republican is elected, like Donald Trump, he will be putting them back in chains, right? Because isn't that what
ridiculous.
Biden and all those folks who don't lie told us? Really?
Well, that's the reason why
Right.
I believe that the black community that votes against their values, their stated values that we have here, they're for the death penalty, 85%. They're opposed protection for gays and lesbians, 91%. They oppose affirmative action in universities, according to this, 87%.
Of blacks.
Yes,
Of blacks.
absolutely.
But we've been told by that convention that's going on even as we speak how terrible it is that these mean old Republicans and the Republicans that Donald Trump put on the court, like John Roberts, who he didn't put on the court, but others, they might think this is not good that we have discrimination against anybody based on color. They may think it's not good to have colleges and universities. Get the hell out of here if you're Jewish, because there's all that Jewish genocide going on. That's what the presidents were saying. What was it, Columbia, Penn, and where else? Harvard?
Yeah.
Okay? These are the presidents of our prestigious universities, and they all got their ass fired, I think, at least Columbia and Penn. I mean, am I getting over emotional about this?
No, but see, they're the ones complaining about systemic racism, but they're the ones actually doing the
Practicing
racism.
systemic
Thank you.
racism.
Yes.
Okay.
And it doesn't make any sense.
We
And
had riots about that, right?
yeah. And
2020, right?
And you've got laws against it, right? So
You've got laws against what?
Against, as you said, Biden talking about putting people back in chains. We had the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery.
Right.
We got the 14th Amendment that made us full citizens, and the 15th Amendment that gave us the right to vote.
And if that weren't enough, we got the Civil Rights Act of 1964,
And the Voting
which said
Rights
what?
Act.
And the Voting Rights Act
Yeah,
of 65. What'd they say?
Absolutely. So it was saying that you couldn't discriminate against a person because of the color of their skin.
And especially not against blacks, because that seemed to be the motivation in 64.
Right.
Because blacks traveling through the country, they could travel, but they could go to a hotel, public accommodation, and they might say, I think mostly in the South, could have been parts of the North, sorry, we don't want you here. But under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that would be illegal, right?
Yes. And that was pushed by Republicans, by the way. Even though it was one of the bills that LBJ put forward, he couldn't do it without Republican support.
Yeah, like you have Dirksen, right?
Yes.
And nobody tells you that. Another big lie, except on public affairs, where we invite people like Dr. Eric Wallace, who's all about the truth, right?
Amen.
That's a religious phrase, all about the truth, right? Why does that come to mind when I think of religion? Truth.
You should know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Well, there you go. I mean, he said it like he means it. I think you mean it.
Now, you asked me before about the Black Conservative Summit. You want me to talk about that
Right.
now?
Yes, sir.
So the Black Conservative Summit is coming up, and we do it annually. We did it last year in Tinley Park. It's again going to be in Tinley Park on September 6th through the 8th. Now, the 8th, we're going to a Cubs game.
Is that courtesy of Todd Ricketts?
It is.
Because he's part of the Ricketts family, and he's one of the owners, along with his brother Tom
Yes.
Ricketts, who's the chairman, right?
Yes.
Chairman, I think, of the board,
President,
and
something
president,
like that,
and
yeah.
everything else running the Chicago
He
Cubs.
kind of runs it.
And you've got an in with these guys, the Ricketts?
Yeah, Todd.
How'd you
and I
get them involved? Why are
Todd-
they doing something with the Black
Todd and I are
Conservative
friends.
Summit?
Todd actually helped me. So after, before COVID, just before COVID, and obviously during COVID, we didn't have any summits.
Right.
So in order to get it started again, I had a conversation with Todd, and he, helped us get it back going again. And this is our second one since then. We did in 23. And talk
okay.
about the Black Conservative
Sure,
Summit.
okay.
So we really think it's apropos what's happening right now in Chicago, as their far left is trying to talk about all their policies. So the theme is actually Black America at a crossroads, cultural Marxism versus a biblical worldview, and understanding what that means. So clearly we're talking to the Christian community and to these pastors that are going there and saying that they're all right with cultural Marxism. Because for them, the most important thing is that we fight against systemic racism, because racism is everywhere. It's rampant. It's the worst thing. I said earlier in another interview that they act as though it's like, Michael Myers or Jason. You kill him in one episode or one movie, and it comes back even stronger than the next one.
It pops up like those things. What do you call them when you to cut off one head, and another two heads come back?
Yeah, right. So I say no. We're not saying that racism doesn't exist. It'll always exist, right?
Yeah.
Every sin that you can think of in humankind will always exist. You're never going to eradicate it. But it's not the number one issue. We got a lot of other issues before that.
Can
So
I
we've
interrupt
got-
now? Okay, keep going about the Black Conservative Summit, and then I'll ask a question.
we're gonna talk about some of those. So we're gonna talk about family. I mean,
okay.
cultural Marxists, don't want the traditional family. Marx was against the family. When it comes to education, school choice, we believe that because education starts in the home, that parents should be able to decide where to send their kids. And with what's going on in the school system right now, we've got a couple of people that are coming to talk about how they need to get their kids out of school, period, and to start Christian schools.
Why do those people say, if they live in Chicago, which we know well, CPS, why would a parent of a black child at CPS think they got to get their kids out of CPS? Or an Hispanic parent, which blacks and Hispanics make up 85%
Yeah, right.
of the parents. So why would
There's hardly
any
any
parent?
white kids in
and then
school.
the whites are not doing too well either. But tell
most
us
of
a little
those
bit about how are blacks doing and Hispanics and whites? How are they doing at CPS?
According to this document I have right here, it says that only 17 out of 100 black students can read at grade level.
Right.
And 21 out of 100 Hispanic kids can read at grade level.
And that's a 2023, 2024 document, you think?
It's a
Around
recent
there.
document from Wirepoints.
Yeah, because here's one. This changes. This is a 2023 document from Wirepoints saying CPS graduates students without the skills they need. And at this particular time, this study showed black students graduated 79%, but blacks only 11% of the CPS black students were at a grade level. So you got this kind of
reading proficiency.
Yeah.
It's got it here, 11%. Yep.
and only 8%, and they were doing
18%.
8% math competency. And then Hispanics, 84% graduate, 18% of the Hispanics read at grade level, 15% of the Hispanics did math proficiently. And folks, I can tell you, and maybe Eric can back this up, that we've been looking at this over these numbers, not always coming from Wirepoints, because they only started about 7 years ago, but we've been looking at them coming from Paul Wallace, who was there from 1995 to 2001, and others. And generally, for those last quarter century or longer, CPS has gyrated between a great high of maybe 20%, maybe they word that now, of black kids and Hispanic kids who can read at grade level, roughly, or maybe that was as low as 10%. It goes between 10 and 20. And whites is high of maybe 50%. And so if you're a black parent there, you should say, why the hell am I doing this? My kids only have a 2 in 10 chance of learning how to read? Really?
So they're not learning how to do math. They're not learning how to read.
Yeah.
What they are learning is what their pronouns are, right?
Right.
And questioning their gender.
Right.
And that's not what you send them to school for, right? It's not this social experiment that they're trying to push down people's throats.
Right.
So people are actually, there's going to be people there. We're going to have a panel that's going to talk about what to do. We've got a person from Moms for Liberty who's going to be on the panel, and they're more about how do we change the school system itself. How do you get on the school board and then make some changes within the system? There are other people who say we need to get your kids out of the system.
Yes. What does that mean? Tell us what institutional mechanisms, if Lori Lightfoot, the ex-mayor, who never, because I went to so many of her press conferences when she let me come, which isn't often, but in 4 years there, I doubt she ever referred to any of the numbers you're talking about. Not at the beginning, not at the end of her tenure. I don't know, Brandon Johnson, the only time he heard these numbers when I asked him about this just before he got elected at a press conference. And he dismissed this out of hand and he said, hey, Jeff, you want to blame the parents and the kids for not knowing how to read? And I said, no. I tried to say, no, I want to blame you and others at the Chicago Teachers Union. But he cut me off. He controlled the mic and he said, we can't do anything about this because we all know Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, he's being fested this week, and he said, we all know it's economic status that determines whether kids can learn how to read and do math. And I guess he means until we give them,
That's not true.
until we raise their economic status to maybe $200,000 a year.
That's not true at all.
But he said that.
I know, but it's laughable.
Do you think
because
Brandon Johnson would lie to you, to me? Seriously?
We have studies done by people like Thomas Sowell and others who have looked at schools back when there was segregation.
Right.
One of the best schools, is it Dunbar? I believe it was Dunbar in Washington, D.C. He said the kids there were doing as good as any white kids, and some were doing better. And they didn't have all the money and all the other stuff. It's not about how much money we spend on schooling. It's about the teachers and whether they love the kids. And
Thomas Sowell, if people look him up, they would find out he's a black person who I believe dropped out of high school, went into the military, turned his life around, went into that racist military, turned his life around, got disciplined, ended up being a PhD in economics from, I think it's the University of Chicago.
yes,
I think
he
it's the
studied under
University of
Milton
Chicago.
Friedman.
Under Milton Friedman, as did I and others. And so that, and Thomas Sowell, they'd say he's a racist. Is he a racist?
Yeah, black racist.
He's a black. It's
Doesn't
so
like black people.
You can't make this stuff
No,
up.
it's crazy.
Okay.
It's crazy.
Yeah, they said this about Bob Fogel when he was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he had written some things about time on a cross, and immediately people said he's a racist. They didn't know his wife happened to be black. I don't mean he couldn't be a racist, but somewhat unlikely, right? Somewhat unlikely. This stuff you can't make up, even though these critics of capitalism,
Yes.
free market, They make it up because they
'Cause they want
prefer
socialism.
They prefer your word. What do they prefer? Not free.
Cultural Marxism.
What is cultural Marxism?
Well, see, the Marxists weren't able to, like in Russia, they were able to take over, right? The Bolshevik revolution, and they were able to take over. It didn't happen in Germany, and it hasn't happened here, as they tried to do. So Antonio Gramsci said, what we need to do is take over the various institutions.
And what are those institutions they're taking over?
Education, the church. I'm forgetting some of the others, but some of the
Well,
major.
let me just stop you there, because to remind people what was going on a few months ago, and we'll start out next month as kids return to school. Our colleges and universities are rotting, because they were dominated by kids. Oh, we heard so much about hate speech, right? They had these hate speech codes, but was nothing wrong about, using their vernacular, was nothing wrong about these radicals on campus who weren't even students there, who were proselytizing for what? For genocide of Jews. So much so that when the president of Harvard was asked, well, is that against your hate speech? And she said, well, it depends. Depends. Paying her $1 million for that answer, that it depends on the context. So they fired her as president, and she kept her $1 million salary. Why? If you got fired, you think you'd get to keep your $1 million salary? Doesn't matter the color of your skin. It matters the political beliefs. So me, you, we're in big trouble, okay? Doesn't matter whether we're white or black or Hispanic or whatever. If we don't believe in what they say is the wisdom of the woke, go ahead, tell us more about your Black Conservative Summit.
I was just looking at the agenda. So I'm starting out talking about kingdoms in conflict. It's a TV show we do, and it talks about the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of men. Again, we're coming from a Christian point of view.
Right.
We've got a panel on the state of Black America in the church. Ian Rowe wrote a book talking about agency, and he's going to talk about agency.
I've read it. Fantastic book, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Ian Rowe. I'm going there just to see Ian Rowe.
Ian Rowe's a brain.
And Google him and look at some of his videos. They'll knock you out, really.
Pierre Wilson from Blexit. He's kind of the national director. He's talking about Black America's exit. Obviously, you mentioned, did you mention Tim Scott? I can't remember, but Tim Scott is going to be there. He's going to be our keynote speaker.
Tell us a little bit about Tim Scott.
Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, former presidential candidate, and was being considered to be vice president under Trump.
Does he happen to be black?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
he happens to be black.
He happens to be black. Yeah.
And so even though there's systemic racism, he is a senator. Was he a congressman before that?
Yes, he was a congressman.
So he rose. Was that in South Carolina? Wasn't he appointed in South Carolina before he was elected?
He was appointed to senator, and then he was elected.
And who appointed him? Do you know?
Can't think of her name. She ran for president too.
Yeah, and she's Indian, I think, Indian American.
Yes.
Nikki Haley.
Nikki Haley. There you go.
She's another systemic racist, even though she's Indian American. Like Kamala is part Indian American. All these powerful people who can appoint senators, who can become vice president. And, Kamala became vice president when Biden made a deal. Who was it? The representative from South Carolina.
Yeah. Clyburn?
Yes, James Clyburn.
Yep.
I think pushing 84 now. He's had racism all his life. And he suffered in South Carolina so that he could become perhaps the most powerful person in the country, because he made a president. When Biden said, I'm in trouble, he said, let's make a deal. Tell you what, Joe, if you become president, to pick a person of color, I think he said, maybe black, that's a person of color. If you do that, I'll make sure you ruin the South Carolina primary, Democratic primary. And everybody knows if you win that, you're in. And that's what happened. And also, he promised, sold two things, I think he said, Biden, and also I'll throw in, I'll make a first Supreme Court nominee chance I have, make sure that person's black. That is how systemic racism is beat. Not by merit, because that black Supreme Court justice now, but she could make it on her own, I know her. I may differ on her views, but that person is talented. In a meritocracy, she would rise to the top. She doesn't need the help of Joe Biden, Claiborne. And look, we got to get out, but they could probably get any person who wants to know more about what you do. Where do they go?
If they're looking for the summit, it's blackconservativesummit.net. Again, blackconservativesummit.net. And that'll also take you to the Freedom's Journal website as well, because that's just a page on the website. freedomsinstitute.org.
Everything's there.
Everything is there.
Okay. You come back soon to
Sure.
Public Affairs. And you come back soon, every week, next week, all the time, to Public Affairs.